Many of you may be surprised to learn that there is a spiritual ego, because ego is often associated with worldliness. But in fact, there is an amazing parallel between the worldly ego and the spiritual ego that eludes the spiritual seeker simply because in the spiritual world, the ego uses a back door that often makes it difficult for the spiritual seeker to recognize its quiet manipulation. How does this happen? Well, on the spiritual path, as you progress, you would come to a place within yourself whereby you start to lose identity with all the things that are attached to or aligned with the worldly ego, such as the false promise of happiness based upon your accomplishments, your achievements, your material possessions, status, power, fame, your money, your wealth, a false sense of importance or superiority. And as you move now from worldliness to a spiritual life, what happens is very subtly the ego now shifts from all things worldly to all things spiritual. So what ends up happening is that you end up with similar problems, different platforms. So, why is the ego so sneaky? Well, ego is associated with thought. One cannot exist with the other, which gives rise to the personal, individual identity, or the little personal me, the individualized self, the Sandra, the Tom, the Bob, the Jane, the Mary, the Joe. So, when consciousness, and by now we all know that we're not merely this body, that we are in fact consciousness, when consciousness hooks onto thought and the little me arises, the individual sense of self arises, there is ego. And nothing is wrong with this because this is creation, which is needed for all this experience to take place in life. Where things get off balanced is how consciousness hooks on to thought and what it does with it. See, in the platform of the material world, consciousness is engrossed with false ideas and concepts of itself. This is who I am based on my accomplishments, my money, my power, my status, etc. When you realize the falseness in this because it is not providing you with lasting happiness, you tend to shift now your attention and your focus from the worldly platform to the spiritual platform. So, what happens? Ego simply now shifts from the worldly to the spiritual, and it starts to play there, giving rise to the spiritual ego. It is sneaky because consciousness is not aware enough or conscious enough as to what is happening. And this is how the ego now starts to play in the spiritual world of the individual seeker. You begin to believe that your desire for God realization is worthier and better than the worldly person's desires. And while there is a level of truth in it, where the problem comes about that hinders your conscious evolution is when you create an identity with your spiritual choice, your path, and even your religiousness, such that you feel you are better and above the worldly person who has made such a choice. This is spiritual ego, a false sense of identity, because you're saying, this is who I am. I am a spiritual and godly person. I actually know people who do not even go to church, who do not read scriptures, even go to a temple, and yet they are far better human beings than some of such spiritual seekers. So be very careful of the pedestal you place yourself upon. as it can be the very thing that life could use to topple you and humble you. And I've seen um, this spiritual ego even break up friendships and relationships. And your spiritual ego can also do the converse to this. There's a flip side to this where you are not feeling as though you're above others, but you put yourself so lowly, so below. It's not even, it's a pretentious humbleness. You start to tell yourself, I'm on this spiritual path, but I'm not good enough to share anything spiritual with anybody or, even give a spiritual message. This is the spiritual ego with its own insecurities. Another evidence of the spiritual ego at work that could really hinder spiritual progress can be seen when you create an identity with your spiritual jewelry and your humble clothes, because now you've discarded all your fashionable clothes and you believe you are divine and humble. In fact, you are more divine and humble than the worldly person who wears their tailored clothes and exquisite jewelry. But listen to this. If the worldly person is identified with his or her clothes, so are you, the spiritual seeker. Where is the difference? You both have the same problem of false sense of importance, just using different platforms. So I say you have a choice. Wear your fancy clothes and accessories and look nice, or wear plain clothes and look depressing. Same ego. Use it to feel good rather than down. There are some people who wear plain clothes and they shine, such as yogis, and we have St. Francis of Assisi because of their aura and state of being. So they may not look down even though they are wearing simple clothes. Their aura shines. Now, St. Francis actually also went naked according to the novel. So he wasn't only shining, but he was also flashing. When you look at even within my own culture, we have Indian gods and goddesses. They wore beautiful clothes, and I always say Indian clothes and jewelry and accessories are absolutely one of the most beautiful set of garments that exist on this earth. So wear it. It's fine. My point here is wear whatever you want because it feels natural to you at this stage in your life, because you feel at ease and you are comfortable in yourself, whether it is humble clothes or beautiful clothes. Wear it not because it puts you above others in your mind. There is no need to criticize others for their pretty clothes and their bling bling jewelry if you choose to wear humble clothes. Wear it because that's where you are in this stage, in this place in your life. Then you are evolving. You no longer now will spend time shopping and fussing over things. I'm one of those people. I prefer something simple. I don't like shopping, but it provides me now with the time dedicated for meditation, for becoming the watchful observer of myself. I have the time now to engage in spiritual events and gatherings and to really look within myself to transform and evolve consciously. The spiritual ego could also lead you, the spiritual seeker, to falsely believe that somehow poverty is nobler and grander and more humble than a successful rich person's riches. You would find that the poor spiritual person may even want the rich material person to donate to their cause. If you want this, then don't condemn this rich person and feel that somehow you are better than them because you are not wealthy but spiritual. not because you are a spiritual seeker and poor means that you are humble. It simply means one of two things, or both. Either you lack the knowledge in how to become wealthy, or two, you are not willing or simply not interested in becoming rich. And this is fine as long as you don't falsely feel as though you're above others because of this. Otherwise, you would be diluting spirituality. Likewise, the rich person isn't necessarily better than the poor spiritual seeker. Somehow, many spiritual seekers tend to think that it is not good to have wealth and material possessions. And I won't discuss this further at this point. I've already done a video on this, and you can check it out. It should be at the end screen. I linked it. Is there conflict between money and spirituality? I believe that's the name of the video. So you can click on it at the end of this video and look at it. In the Indian scriptures, such as the Ramayana, we had Lord Rama, who he was a king. He came from a rich background, and he was a divine person, so a divine being. So these are the things, these concepts and false ideas are what are going to hinder our spiritual progress, and we need to disidentify with these concepts. Okay? The spiritual ego tends to show up in a myriad of deceiving ways, such as when you, the spiritual seeker, believe that somehow you are special and important because of the company you keep with gurus and priests and pundits, and you even end up seeking their attention and approval. You seek out high position and power in that realm, which, by the way, is no different to the worldly person who thinks highly of himself because of the company he keeps with successful, wealthy, influential people, and from whom they are also seeking approval, just to confirm that you are somebody. Another trapping of the spiritual ego is often when you choose a spiritual life, a natural thing to do is to want to do charity work. So you start to do your good in doing some charitable work, and you feel as though heaven's door is now open to you. But you start to feel as though you are better than the person, the worldly person, who is not even doing anything charitable. So you're doing service to one and a disservice to the other. In doing so, what you end up doing is starting to shut heaven's door on yourself. And also, what happens, and I've seen this, where spiritual people who've chosen to do charitable work to help their spiritual life in some way, is that they start to condemn meditators such as yogis who are in the forests or in isolation meditating. Now, these yogis are not doing any harm. They are not harming anybody. And most importantly, they are not creating mental noise like you who are doing your charitable work. They're actually doing a great service to humanity by keeping a balance within themselves and helping to keep this world in balance. So they're maintaining nonviolence in thoughts, words, and deeds. What are you doing as a spiritual seeker? So be humble that you are in a blessed position to do some charity work, to be a loving and caring instrument, to be of service to humanity in this way. So you don't need to make noise about it. The spiritual seeker, the spiritual ego can also sneak in through the back door when you, the seeker, create a false sense of importance and belief that you are spiritually advanced and evolved compared to other seekers because of your paranormal experiences. You start to see notice synchronicity happening. So you start to give yourself a pat on the shoulder. I'm becoming more spiritual. You see repeating numbers such as 111, 222, 333. All this is a trapping of the mind, the spiritual ego. And some meditators, they even experience colors and light and other paranormal experiences. This is just a sideshow, not the main scene. And many ancient gurus warned spiritual seekers about this sideshow, how easy it is to be tricked by the spiritual ego into getting stuck there. You see, the main scene is about you becoming free. So you have to start noticing what your ego is doing and how it is misleading you along the spiritual path. So you can begin to disidentify with everything that gives you any false sense of self importance and superiority above others. Then you can say this is spiritual evolution. This is when you know consciousness is awakening. See, as a spiritual aspirant, when you leave the worldly life and you enter the spiritual world, you may feel as though you're detached from things and materiality. But in reality, what happens is that now you begin to become very attached and identified with spiritual stuff, such as your spiritual books, your spiritual clothes, your religion, your church, your temple, your mosque, your jewelry, your pictures, even people. All of these are trappings of the spiritual ego. So, when as a spiritual seeker, you're truly comfortable in yourself, where you are within, and you are no longer creating an identity with earthly or spiritual things, you will have no more need to compare yourself with others. You do not feel as though you're superior or better than anybody else. You truly and deeply understand that each person is where they are, with the level of understanding they have in this play of life. Your eyes are now constantly turned inward on yourself. They're no longer outward on everybody else and everything else. And whatever you do, whatever you own, whatever you wear, whatever you experience, and even your religion, are not based on some identity of being better or superior than others, but as a natural movement that occurs in you in consciousness. So, what you do now is that you use your earthly things as needed without identity. You use the spiritual things to help you to progress on your spiritual path. So both are serving practical purposes. They are a means, not the end. So, as such, when you are in the company of gurus and priests and pundits, or you may even be one, you naturally see this as an opportunity to gain spiritual knowledge and enlightenment, not for self importance. And if and when you wear simple clothes that are associated with a spiritual life or path, and you adorn yourself with spiritual jewelry, it is simply because they serve the practical purpose of being reminders that God is with you and they're there protecting you. They help protect you, not to give out an impression to others that you are so spiritual. There are many misconceptions about the ego and on the spiritual journey. And one of the biggest one is that when someone chooses a spiritual path, is that the ego must somehow be killed off. As long as you exist in human form, in this dualistic play of life, the ego will exist, as it has its part to play, just as much as divinity has its part to play. The key is knowing how to use ego for its practical purpose and for it not to take you down some misleading road. So, You have to learn how to use ego and not let ego use you. So, how to use ego? Use ego to feel good, not down. I say it is better to have a puffed up ego doing something purposeful, meaningful, and productive in life than to be a depressed spiritual seeker. But I love to throw in my caveat, so here's my caveat. Don't get so puffed up because life has a way. It can bring you an experience to deflate that ego very quickly and easily. Use ego to get what is needed materially for practical reasons to make your life physically comfortable while pursuing a spiritual life. So you don't have to be too concerned about the basic necessities of life. Then you're going to find the spiritual journey to be a little easier because you understand the practical purpose this serves, so you have no false identity created with your material possessions. And don't take it for granted. Instead, be grateful that you have it. Use ego to get your financial wealth. Churches and ashrams are not lacking, so why should you? Just see its practicality. That's it. You know, there are some people, they may have $1 million, and that may be quite sufficient to live a comfortable life so that you can pursue a spiritual path. But what they do is they end up saying, I am not going to be seen very successful with just 1 million. So let me go make 10 million so I will look good in the eyes of others. I can say I have used my potential, but you're only using a certain level of potential. Your potential is not just on the physical, it's on the inner. So they go and they make a 10 million. And when they've accomplished that, that's not enough. They have to make 100. And then they make 1 billion because that's the in thing nowadays. A millionaire is not good enough. You have to become a billionaire. This is a trapping. And this trapping is extended by they saying now, if I make 1 billion, I have more money, I can help so many other people. Well, if it is so important for you to help people, and you know how to make all this millions and billions, why not go and teach people how to make that first million and do it for free? Because I can assure you there are many who would love to learn how to do that, and because they would feel much better about themselves. So when you extend it in this way, that's even a greater trapping by the spiritual ego. So learn how to use ego. Don't let ego use you. The ancient enlightened masters used ego to carry out their roles through their individualized sense of self, the little me, their me. But ever realized ancient saint master avatar who walked on this earth knew how to use their ego. And from the moment they responded to their name, it meant that their individualized sense of me was there, and therefore ego was present. As long as the body is there, ego is there. There was this ancient master called Ramakrishna, and I read a book about him many, many years ago, so I'm hoping I have the facts still correct. He had an obsession for food because his ego was trapped in food as a means to keep his body here on earth, to keep him existing here on earth as a means to help his devotees. That is what he came on earth to do. And he told his wife was very concerned about this quality in him, his obsession for food. And he explained this to his wife as being the reason, so that he can stay here a little longer to help his devotees. And he even told her that the day she brings food to him and he turns away, he has no more interest in it. He has, I believe it was 3 more days left for him to stay on earth. And so said, so done. At that point, it means that as soon as he did this and he turned away from the food, It meant he came here, he has accomplished what he came here on earth to do. And at that point, he lost total personal individual sense of identity, and pure consciousness withdrew into itself. So there was no more ego, and therefore he discarded the body, leaving through the crown chakra. As long as there is body, there is an individualized sense of self, a personal identity, and therefore there is ego. The trick is to know how to use ego to evolve, not to allow it to cause you to devolve. To conclude, the true Gyani, and Gyani is a Sanskrit word for meaning the person of wisdom, the true Gyani knows that the key lies not in trying to kill off the ego, as is often taught in spirituality, but the key lies in the disidentification with its often misleading tendencies that create false identities. The reason I chose to cover this topic is to help you understand and become a little more conscious and aware of the workings of the spiritual ego and how it is parallel to the workings of the worldly ego and how it works in a sneaky way, so you do not become entrapped by the spiritual ego to hinder your spiritual progress and evolution. In the novel Saint Francis of Assisi by Nikos Kazantzakis, and forgive my pronunciation here, Saint Francis rightly said to Brother Leo, to be a saint means to renounce not only everything earthly, but also everything divine. Why? Because the ego that creates attachment and identity to earthly things is the same ego that creates attachment and identity to divine and spiritual things. To be a saint means to be free, and to be free means to let go and detach inwardly of all things and concepts. So, this renunciation is not necessarily on a physical level, but it is an inner renunciation, as it is not necessary to give up physically all your worldly or divine things, as they are needed for your practical stay here on earth and for the evolution of your consciousness. And when such a realization occurs on a deep level, such that you get it, and it touches your soul deeply, you, the spiritual aspirant, becomes humble, knowing that such a realization is all by grace, and you become free.